Right. Thank you, and hello. My name is Ilya Feinberg. I'm a senior program manager at Microsoft. Um, I work as part of the business applications product group in a team called Fast Track. So I believe you had a keynote with um, Swami, who is essentially the lead person for our organization this morning. And I don't know if he told you about what we do and what we are, but just kind of a short introduction, preamble to who we are and what we do. The Fast Track team at the product group is responsible for essentially connecting the customer and engineering groups. So we work with customers that are actually implementing Dynamics and Power Platform in the field every day, and we are trying to advise them on how to best do that according to best practices, according to the, I would say, known practices that we do around the world for the industries they're in, or for resolving the same difficulties and the same issues that they might have. So our job is to understand if they're doing a good job implementing Dynamics and Power Platform solution, and if not, what can we do and what we can advise them to do that according to best practices. We do have a framework for that called Success by Design, which we use to help customers succeed in their implementations. And from the other end, of course, we expect to kind of collect some information in terms of what are the difficulties and what are the issues that our customers encounter with our products and their suggestions, and try to use that to propose changes and additions to the product roadmap strategy, so that we can always go ahead and improve our product in such a way that not just this customer particularly will benefit from that, but also all customers around the world. And really, if you look at how we evolve our product over time, a lot of it comes through that kind of process, through customers and partners telling us, we want this, we want that, or this is something that is not working well, and this is how we see that to change in the future. So a lot of that comes thanks to that kind of work. Let me share my decks. We'll have two parts. We'll have today a short presentation and then a demo as well. So hopefully you should be able to see the window, the presentation window now. If someone can please confirm in the chat.
Yes, it is. It is visible.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So today we're going to talk about process mining. Process mining is, I would say, something maybe a bit new to most people. On the other hand, it is something that have existed in one form or another for quite some time. In a nutshell, process mining is a system to be able to understand how certain processes work, right, or how certain applications work, and do they do so efficiently. So we of course can implement certain, let's say, KPIs or reports to understand the efficiency of a certain process, but normally we don't have that information across our organization or across different processes unless we specifically implement some KPI or some report or something to measure that. And what process mining is trying to do is trying to get the data that we get out of all those processes. Let's say it can be an invoice processing process or sales process or whatever it is, even not processes, even apps, for example. And based on the data that is produced by almost any process, we try to understand the efficiency of whatever that process works well or not. And if not well, then what are the core reasons? What is the root cause for that? And how we can address that. So those kind of systems have existed for a while, but mostly in, I would say, large organizations, in specialty organizations. You would maybe see that commonly in banks, insurance companies, and more kind of risk-averse organizations that that could in the past spend the money necessary to install large mainframe servers and run that logic somewhere in their data centers or in the basement of their offices as it was commonly happening. And this kind of systems have existed, I would say, since the 90s even, so for quite some time, but they were all only available for certain large organizations and only for certain processes. So what has changed today is that now we are gradually moving to the cloud, and with the cloud we have new developments in that area that essentially enable almost organizations of almost any size to do process mining, to understand the efficiency of the processes and to improve their businesses without investing millions into mainframes and all that good stuff. So if we go deeper into what process mining is, what kind of processes can you actually use it for? So there's an example here on the slide of several processes that can work, like efficient manufacturing, invoice processing, sales processes, lead qualification, whatever else, customer service. And you would see that typically in many organizations, there will be some investment done in things like customer service or processes which directly impact the front office operations. So how I communicate with customers and the experience customers have with my organization, or with my company. This is something that people will, or managers will commonly focus on, because that's really is the face of the company, and efficiency there is the most important thing. And companies would spend a lot of money implementing specific KPIs and reports and business processes to monitor this data. So, for example, many would have, let's say, reports saying what is the average case duration and how many cases I had per day and who did how many cases and what departments did best. But what happens in the back end? So, okay, so I mean, let's say someone from customer service has responded to a case in 2 seconds, and that's a great result. But then the whole process the whole case took 2 days to resolve because there's someone in accounting that took a day and a half to look at an invoice and actually process that invoice, and then while the experience on the end user was fine, responsive and great, the actual overall experience or the actual overall process might not be as efficient as you would like it to be. And typically, again, organizations would look only at one end of that process. With process mining, we can now look without adding anything new, without developing anything new. We can, just based on the data that has been produced, look at the efficiency of the entire process, or with other processes which are typically not really looked at too carefully. How do they work? So kind of any process would produce some kind of data points. So, I have a process which has, let's say if it's the invoice processing, which has an invoice ID, right, which I'm working on, has a person assigned to it, or multiple persons assigned to it, has multiple activities within that process. So I accept an invoice, I approve the invoice, I direct it for approval for someone else, I do reviews, whatever it is. Every step of that way is some kind of activity or an event within that particular invoice ID that happens. And this is data that, regardless of the kind of system that I have, is recorded somewhere. It can be Salesforce, it can be Dynamics, can be, even if you work in Excel, quite frankly, you still would have those basic data points. And if you do have those basic data points, then it doesn't really matter what kind of process you have. You will still be able to get the insights that modern process mining solutions offer for you. So, as I mentioned, the whole process mining thing is, I would say, still not very well known, but it's not entirely new. And even in the cloud space, we already have quite a few offerings that exist on the market. So if you look at the market right now, the way it looks like is that you have several solutions. You have Process Gold, you have Ares, you have PathNow, you have Minet, you have Celonis. And if you will look a bit closely, so right now Celonis is probably the biggest player in the market. And if we look closely, then we see that there is some convergence in the market, which literally happened in the past little than over a year or 2 years or so. And we already see that Process Gold was acquired by UiPath. We see that Aris was acquired by Software AG. And we see that other such convergences happen over time. So, for example, from the market point of view, we have also created a new offering in that space called Process Advisor, which is part of the Power Platform and part of Power Automate. But also we have entered the market by also acquiring an existing player. So we have looked into Mineit, which we thought is a nice solution that would play very well with the kind of offering we want to do. And that now is also part of Microsoft. But if you look further, PathNow became part of Celonis, which literally happened in the past, I think, 2 or 3 months. And now the whole space, as you can see, becomes very much more concentrated into larger vendors. So it has begun about 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, it was a space where there was a lot of smaller cloud providers that did process mining. And now we have a space where you have a more convergence of that into larger vendors and larger players in the market. And again, if I were looking at that trend as someone standing on the outside, I would think that the reason it happens is because those vendors expect that something in the market would happen in terms of growth, and that will become a major area of interest for customers, which we do really see that's the dynamic in the market. So if you're still not aware of what it is and how it works, then I think this is really the beginning of a certain golden age of looking at that and having customers onboarded with that technology. So what's different between what we are trying to do and what other vendors are trying to do as well? I looked at, for example, some marketing material that comes from other vendors, and this is literally a screenshot from one of them. And that shows you a diagram that is a result of a process mining solution that tries to illustrate like a diagram that visualizes a very complex process. So being a normal person and not a data scientist or even a data analyst, and honestly, even making a report scares me at my level of data analysis. This is not something that I would want to get as a result as someone who works with process mining or someone who tries to understand the efficiency of a process. So the way we're trying to do that differently is by working with the same standards that we apply to other Power Platform solutions. So we are trying not to make it look like this, which is really readable only by, I think, data scientists or people who are specialists in that area, but something that looks maybe like this, or like this, or like this, right? So in one word or in one phrase, something that is built for makers or for citizen developers, however you want to call that, but something that is built for regular people who just want to get the proper insights of what's going on in their organizations, and up to a level where I, for example, as a manager or someone in the leadership team of an organization would be able to do it myself, as with the skills of a regular office worker, and with the data I already have in my organization, get insights about its efficiency, and be able to act upon that without calling in a whole squad of developers to build out reports and KPIs and data scientists and all that good stuff. It is still necessary for some things, of course, but it is, I would say, now becomes less necessary for understanding the overall efficiency of how your organization works. Right. So I will show you exactly how that works, and we're actually going to build a process mining solution right now with you in about 15 minutes from start to finish. But before I go into that, a few core concepts that I want to talk about. So as I said, almost any business process can be mined, right, for insights, as long as you have basic set of data about the process. And what we really need to have is 4 data points. So we need to have the name of the process. So in this particular demo, we're going to do a look into how process invoicing, how invoice processing works at an imaginary organization. So the name of the process, the ID of the process, meaning the every instance of a process. So in that case, it would be an invoice ID, right? So I'll be looking at invoice IDs processed through that invoice processing business process. The events within each invoice. So I can have an event to ingest the invoice. I can have an event to process the invoice, to redirect the invoice, to notify the customer, different kind of activities, and the timestamp indicating of when the event happened. So when have I started working on a certain activity, and when I have finished working, or just one timestamp indicating of when I have moved from one activity to the other. So if I have those 4 data points, then I can basically already do process mining. And this is 4 data points that you will find in, well, I can't really imagine a process that would not have that, but almost I would say in any process. We have 2 ways to approach that. So we have what's called an activity log and event log. The difference being in how many timestamps we have. So an event log is meaning that we have something that happens within the process that has just one timestamp. So it has just a start date, and then we know based on that start date when we transition between different activities. So how much time it took us to complete an activity is mandated by the start date of the next activity, right? That's how we know the overall length of the process and the overall length of activities. But we can also have a process where we will have clear indication of a start date and an end date of a certain activity or a certain event. And in that particular case, it's called an activity log. So we have, instead of one timestamp, we have 2 timestamps indicating the start and the end of a certain event within the process. Okay, so this is everything we need to know at this point. And now we now go into the actual demo. All right, now sharing my screen again. Tell me when you can see it. Right, assuming that you can see it, hopefully. Yeah, okay. Right, so today, if you go into Power Automate, so if you go into make.powerautomate.com, you will have the regular Power Automate flows and connectors and connections and all that good stuff. But you will also have something called Process Advisor. And Process Advisor is really the name for our process mining offering. So if you go here, you have your few options, and actually today in today's demo, you will be, I think, probably one of the first people to see the next version or the next iteration of Process Advisor. So we have released a new version of that, which was deployed literally, I think, yesterday or the day before. So it's like really, really new. We actually now have even a desktop application which you can download and do process mining, but you can also do that still in the cloud as well. So you have here, we can start a new process. You have templates for existing processes here as well that you can use for different kinds of solutions, for Azure, for F&O, for Power Platform, and even for application analysis. And you have learning materials which will help you to learn how to do certain things. I'm going to start from scratch. And when I do, I have here two choices. I have data and I have recordings. So everything I was talking about so far was about data, meaning that I'm taking data that has been produced by a process, and I'm trying to understand, based on this data, how efficient that process is. However, there is another way to do it, is using recordings, is when we literally record what a user does on their computer, and we give you an analysis based on that. So, they clicked the button, they went to this window, they opened that window, they opened a different window. So all that can be recorded and can be intelligently understood by an AI, which will give you essentially an analysis of how that particular user worked. The major difference between the two is that when we use recordings, we look kind of at the micro level. So we look at one or more specific individuals of exactly how they work. So it gives you like a very detailed overview of how specifically certain individuals do that. But you cannot use the same technique to analyze the recordings of, let's say, 10,000 or 100,000 employees. I mean, this would not just not work. But you can do that with data. So data produced by even 1 million employees is no problem. You can get that from your ERP system or from whatever system you work at, and use that to, based on the data produced, understand what were they actually doing and if they were doing that efficiently. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to use data. This is, by the way, still in preview, meaning that you can use it for free as long as you have access to Automate. So it's not a premium feature. Means that essentially the same demo I'm doing right now, you'll be able to do yourself at home and repeat basically the same process. So let me name the solution. Then I'm creating a new solution. There's also a link here to sample data if you want to use that, or you can create your own sample data. I'll see here a window which shows me some information with help in terms of what I can do and what I should do. Information about the attributes that we have discussed, so the minimum set of information that you need. So this is also explained here as well. And that window here, if you ever used any kind of data solution by Microsoft, so Power BI or Excel or anything that imports data into a Microsoft product, then this window should look very familiar. This is what's called the Power Query. It allows you to import data from basically any supported source, and a lot of sources are supported out of the box. So if you want to get data directly from Salesforce, you can. From, let's say, an Oracle database, you can. SQL Server, Power Platform, so Dataverse directly. You can do all of that without moving data anywhere, right? So we can use data that is already existing in your system today. So in my case, I'm going to select a text file, a CSV file, and I have two options. I can either upload the file or I can link to a file which I already have in my OneDrive, which is what I'm going to do. Let me pick up the right connection here. And then I'm clicking next. So it's going to upload the file. And for CSV file specifically, there's an extra step there. So it would show me a window that helps me to configure my CSV file based on the type of file it is. So if it's a comma separated or semicolon or something else, it's choose the right encoding. So I can verify in this step that my CSV file is perfectly fine, which it is. And I see here that I have some information about the location, the role, resource, timestamp, case ID, and activity name. So you already see that in this file, even though I don't have that much information about the whole process, I do have all the information that I would need for a successful process mining analysis. So going forward, I would have essentially the same window that you would see in any other Power Query import. I have the query itself, which is just a file, and I have the ability to do some data manipulations. So, for example, I can remove columns that I don't want. I can sort them. I can create calculated columns. I can combine several columns into one. So there's a lot of things here that I can do. And especially if I have advanced skills in that tool, I can do really a lot of things, even on that step already, to prepare my data in a way where that I want. Again, I don't have to do here anything. This is why it says optional here. And in my case, I don't really need to do anything. I have imported exactly the same data that I want to use in my process. So I'm just going to go next. And now I'm taken to a step where essentially I will have to map my data into the data model that we have discussed. So I need to decide those 4 main data points. So the first data point about the name of the process is we already done that. So we have named the process. Now I need to map the activity name, which in my case, it would map to the activity attribute. The case ID or my invoice ID will be mapped into the case ID. And the timestamp, I have a start timestamp, and I will map that into an event start. So you'll see that I also have an event end, which is not a required field. So in case I have that, the process will use that. But if I don't have that, then it's also fine. I don't have to have that. Other things are just by default configured as an event level attribute. So there are additional attributes that I have here for location, resource, and role, which I will just use to do filtering on the process. In this particular case, I will also I can also select assign the resource to the resource field. So it will give a bit more information about the type of field that it is to the system, to the AI, and will allow the AI to do kind of a more intelligent understanding of what that field is used for. But yeah, the others are just regular event level attributes, so they just happen on every event. And that's it. So in terms of data ingestion, in terms of building my process mining solution, that is literally it. That took us like 3 minutes to do. And we have imported that from a file. We could the same way imported that directly from a production Dataverse or from FNO or from Salesforce, whatever it is. So when I click Save and Analyze, it will create a new data model. So it will analyze the data that I have provided, and will create a new process mining data model, which will give me insights into the data that I have imported. So it does take a few minutes to do that, which we're not going to spend right now because I have already done that earlier this morning. And the result would look something like this. So it might look a little bit scary at first, but let me show you exactly what it is and what it's for. So first of all, we have here some key information about our process. So we have information about the median and average case duration, information about loops, which can be important. So a loop is essentially a self loop is when you have some kind of activity within the process, which for whatever reason repeats itself. So I have, let's say, approved an invoice, and for whatever reason, my process also says that I need to approve it again, and I'm the person to do that. So if I have those kind of activities, that's maybe a point of concern. But I see that I have 0. The loop cases, meaning that I have several kind of a chain of 2 or more activities which repeat themselves. So I have within the process, let's say, an approver which needs to approve the invoice multiple times based on several iterations of the invoice. And in that case, essentially, I will have to redo several activities all over again sometimes. This can be normal, and in some cases it is normal for to go through an iterative process where we review and approve and reapprove, and that can be a normal process. So in this case, I see that I have 22% of cases are going through some kind of loop, which is fine. And rework cases is any case that have any kind of loop. So it's either one activity repeating itself or multiple activities repeating themselves. So again, I mean, that's fine. And I have 8 people working on my cases. I also have 11 paths, 133 cases, and 13 activities. So the paths are every kind of way a process can be completed. So every way that an invoice can reach a start to an end is called essentially a path. So I have essentially here 11 ways that this process can go from start to finish. And here I see a diagram essentially of the frequency of those paths. So how often I use each and every path that I have in my solution. So if I zoom in on the diagram, we see that it's kind of much less scary. Yeah. Okay. And if you look at it, essentially what it gives me is a list of all the activities that I have within my process. This is not for a specific process. This is essentially kind of all the possible paths and all the possible activities rolled into one diagram. So everything that could happen in my process is indicated here visually, and I can actually look at the different aspects of how that works. So I can see that I have, for example, 133 cases, and I see that all 133 cases are involved, for example, in this activity in invoice entry. I mean, obviously that's literally the first thing I do, so there's really no choice here. But further on, I see that there is conversions. So I see that roughly half of the activities go through this route, and half of the invoices go through this route. So 67 go through confirmation of payment, and 66 of them go into check customer payment. There's probably a process that mandates that, but I see that that's the way I go. And further on, I see that there's even more conversions into different activities, activities in the process, that some of them happen and some of them don't. So the thickness of the lines actually tells me the frequency of how many cases went through a certain path, right? So this is the thickest one, right, at the starts. So we have half of the cases going here and half here. And if you go down, we see that here we have thinner lines. So only very few cases go through this activity. So only 6 cases go here from the first activity to this one, and only 7 go through this route from this activity to this one. If I actually want to focus on that particular area, I can click an activity, and it will show me all the adjacent activities that are connected with it. So all the ways that I can get to that particular activity that is concerning to me. And this activity might be a bit concerning to me because it appears that not a lot of invoices even use that. And if I switch here to performance, which performance essentially is meaning time, I can also see that this takes a lot of time to do. So if I switch into mean duration, I see that if I go into that particular activity, which doesn't happen very often, it adds 2 days, so almost a full day to get into that activity, and over a day to get out of it. So it takes me more than 2 days, or 2 days to go through an invoice processing process when this particular activity is involved. And that's a lot. And I wonder, why does that happen? And what's the general efficiency across my organization? So I can do some further analysis here by looking at the averages. So my average is 2.5 days to process any kind of invoice, which is okay. That's fair. But I can do filtering with the data that I have imported to understand where does that number actually come from. So I have here, aside from the key data points we have imported, we also have the role, the resources, and the location. So if I look at the role, for example, I have here a few options. I'm not sure why it doesn't work. Okay. I have here a few options. I have in roles, I have the invoice approver and the invoice processor. Whenever I click on one of them, it will filter out all the invoices which use that particular role, where that particular role was involved. And I see that for process approver, the only about half of the cases were involved in that, so 67 out of the 133. And I can see that the process the average process that was using this particular role. Let's say that this long activity with a refinery special voucher was indeed involved in that role as well. And if I look at a different role, I see that essentially this role, the invoice processor, was involved in every single case that I have across my organization. So whatever the problem is, it's probably not related to a specific role. Okay, that's fine. We can continue going forward. And we can look at specific people. So let's look at how Abby does things. So if we look at Abby, and we now look at the average case duration, we see that it takes, for some reason, almost 5 days to execute a case, which is, if we remember correctly, our average across the organization is just 2.5 days, but it takes Abby almost 5 days, almost twice the amount of time to execute a certain case, a certain invoice. That's not a great result, but maybe there's an explanation for that. Let's look at other resources. Let's look at Allison, for example. Okay, so we see that Allison, first of all, visually, like purely visually, the process that she works by, it looks much simpler. I mean, it is very straightforward. There's just maybe one deviation, which happens sometimes, but other than that, it's fairly straightforward. And the amount of time that it takes her to execute an invoice is much, much lower. So it's instead of 5 days, it's just 2 days. So it's not just less than half of what it takes Abby, it's also less than the average across the organization. Okay, let's go forward. Let's look at how Adrian does things. Okay, so Adrian, again, we have an even worse result. So it's even worse than Abby. It's 5.5 days. The process looks, I mean, I don't have to even to deep dive into that. It looks like super complicated, so much so that I don't even want to get into how that works. But I see that it is taking much more time than Allison, much more time than its average across the organization. And the process is just visually much more complicated. And with all that work, only 15 cases were handled by that person, by Adrian, in the period that we have indicated. So that's not a great result. But still, I don't see any kind of information that would tell me that one person does things faster or slower than the other, based on what, right? I don't know what is the actual cause. But I can continue and looking into my data and try and discover that. So if I look at locations, I can compare. I have 3 offices in my organization in San Diego, San Francisco, and Seattle. If I look at San Diego, then I can see that they have done about a quarter of all the workload, all the cases. So it's not a great result. They are a third of my organization, but they have done only a quarter of the work. We see that it takes them 5.5 days on average to do the work, even though the average across the organization is 2.5 days. So it's more than twice longer than it takes across the organization to do things. But in that particular office, it takes them 5.5 days. And that already tells me, I mean, I can drill down, of course, and discover that myself, but that tells me that probably the employees that take much longer to do the case are the ones working in San Diego. And if I look at the data further, this is probably what I'm going to discover, but let's look closer and see what we get from that. Let's look, for example, at San Francisco. So in San Francisco, we see that the process is somewhat simpler, actually. We see that they have handled even more cases than San Diego. I mean, they're still responsible for roughly the quarter of the workload, but we also see that while handling a little bit more cases than San Diego, they have also done that much, much quicker. And the process that they work upon is also much, much simpler. Maybe not as simple as we want it to be, but visually it looks much simpler. So 2 days versus 5.5 days, that's a huge, huge difference across the organization. I mean, that should not happen, especially for 2 offices that are located in the same state and fairly close to each other. I mean, there shouldn't be any kind of difference in local regulations or local law that would kind of result in this kind of difference between the two offices. So that is strange to me. Let's look further. And now we're looking at Seattle. Okay, so Seattle has a process that is not too complicated, so it seems to be at the same level of complexity, like visually, purely, right? It seems to be at a similar level of complexity that they have in San Francisco, so not too complicated. We see that this one office is responsible for half of all the workload in my organization, which is a great result for them. And we see that they handle cases very quickly. So my average across the organization is 2.5 days. San Diego takes 5.5 days, while Seattle does things in 1.3 days. This is an amazing result. And either they do things very, very efficiently, or there's something wrong in how my organization is structured. And of course, we can do some more analysis and discover some more information. But the truth is that we have imported too much data. We have basically imported the basic data points that we have and some 3 additional data points for the role, resource, and location. But even based on that, even based on the 15 minutes that we spent doing that analysis, we have discovered something important. We have discovered that we have one particular branch that represents a third of my organization, which drags down the average execution of that particular process down by a lot across my organization. So if, for example, we were to take out San Diego and work just in San Francisco and Seattle, right, then my average case duration would be not 2.5 days, it would be just 1.5 days. And we will not have the San Diego office dragging down the process and possibly the customer experience with very long invoice processing durations of 5.5 days. So what can I do next? As a manager or as a decision maker, I understand where the problem is coming from. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but I know that it's not something that is rampant across my organization, that it is something that happens locally in one of my offices. And I can go there, I can speak with the management, I can speak with the accounting team and understand why is that happening. Is it some kind of local city regulation that requires that more complicated process? Is it some kind of a legacy thing that they do somehow things differently than it is normal to do across my organization? Is it perhaps just mismanagement or the performance of certain people that is not just up to par with how things should be done, and for whatever reason they do things differently? Because if we dive deep into the actual diagram, we will see that even the steps that they do are different in San Francisco and Seattle compared to what's happening in San Diego. And once I have looked into that and I looked into what's going on in that particular office and I have applied the necessary changes to that particular office, I can then let them continue to work for another month, for another quarter, whatever is my reporting period, take a new analysis of the data from that new period, compare that to the old period, and see if I have improved. Have I actually made a difference? And that really is the power of this tool that allows you in literally 15 minutes from nothing, from scratch, to be able to identify serious problems in your organization and potentially deep dive into smaller problems and be able to optimize them. Otherwise, without that tool, you will never would have found out that this happens, either that, or you would have to invest a lot of expensive resources into building out reports and KPIs and whatever is required to get that kind of insights, and you would have to do that for every single process in your organization, which, as you saw, we haven't had to do anything to get to this result. Literally, just take the data that already exists in my ERP system. That's what I wanted to show you. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah, hi, Ilya. I think thanks. It was a nice session. I can see there is one question, so I can read out for you. The question is from Kamesh. So he is asking about, and he want to understand the efficiency of any processes like invoice process in F&O using the process mining tool.
Yeah. So as I said, it doesn't really matter from where do you import the data from. So F&O specifically is supported out of the box, as far as I remember. as long as you have those data points, those 4 data points, so the process ID, event, and event start date, as long as you have that, you can analyze any process if it's FNO or anywhere else. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, it is possible.
Yeah. Thank you then. I think, Ilya, it was a wonderful session. So I would request you to please share your LinkedIn page here so that people can post their questions and interact with you. And once again, thank you for the session.